and with Great Wolf's Howl you can ignore the cooldowns of your war cries. Let all that anger out.
9 days to go until we all log in, and it's time for another PoE2 passive tree video. If you didn't know, I went to a PoE2 event a few weeks back and was able to capture some of the passive skill tree, and I've been covering each section of the tree, discussing some of the more interesting nodes. Today it's the intelligence area of the tree, where the Witch and Sorceress start. Alright, let's begin with one of the reoccurring themes in this area of the tree, which is modifiers to scale energy shield recharge. In yesterday's video, I talked about how the PoE2 passive tree has much fewer options available for energy shield recovery, which is true, as there was no Ghost Reaver keystone in the version of the game that I played, and I also couldn't find any nodes for energy shield leech. However, access to scaling energy shield recharge has been largely increased, and no matter where you are in the intelligence section of the tree, you won't have to path very far to allocate some of these nodes. Keep in mind that energy shield recharge has a 4-second base delay before it begins in PoE2, but nodes like Convalescence will help with that, reducing recharge rate but allowing it to start much faster as a trade-off. Essence Infusion, on the other hand, provides a huge increase to recharge rate, improving the time you require to recover your ES back to full. Meanwhile, Dependable Ward and Rapid Recharge both have the same modifiers, and these are just solid boosts to energy shield recharge, providing both of the stats you need to start recharging faster and recover more ES over time from this mechanic. There's also Refocus, which is going to be useful if you have high cast or attack speed to be able to proc the start of energy shield recharge faster than it would have started naturally, especially considering the longer base delay compared to PoE1. However, it's important to mention that there is no Wicked Ward keystone on the tree in the version that I played, so you won't have that option to be able to prevent damage from stopping your recharge. Okay, let's stick with Energy Shield for a moment and cover some of the nodes which will help you against any incoming stuns on builds that are more focused on ES than life. Stun Threshold is based on maximum life by default, so these types of builds typically need to find a way to become immune to stuns, or have their stun threshold based on their ES instead of life in PoE1. But in PoE2, there's a lot more options available to solve this problem. For example, Dampening Shield, which grants a good chunk of increased maximum energy shield, and adds 12% of your maximum ES to stun threshold. So if you have 5000 energy shield, this modifier would add a flat 600 to your stun threshold. Hallowed provides more of this stat at 20% of maximum ES gained as additional stun threshold, but also helps you shake off a stun a bit faster as well. Then we have a few of the stronger nodes. Eldritch Will is one of only 3 or 4 nodes on the entire passive tree with increased maximum life. You get 3% each to life, mana and energy shield, and once again another 20% of max ES as added stun threshold. And Self-Mortification, which also grants 20% of max ES as added stun threshold, but also increases that stun threshold by 20% while you're on full life. This one is exceptionally good for an energy shield based CI build where you're always on full life to be able to fully benefit from that increased stun threshold. Alright, let's look at a few minion nodes on the left outer edge of the tree. This cluster here, firstly, Right Hand of Darkness, which grants 20% increased AoE to your minions and gives them a 10% chance to inflict Withered on hit. This is going to be really good to combo with some of those Chaos Door abilities when you have minions that attack quickly, or just when you have a lot of minions to hit enemies. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of this cluster is a more defensive minion node in Left Hand of Darkness, which grants 20% additional PDR and 23% Chaos Res to your minions. But in the middle of this cluster is possibly the most important minion node on the entire tree, Lord of Horrors, which makes minion skills have 12% reduced reservation, so you can either use more of them, or invest less into Spirit, or use any excess Spirit you do have to reserve other powerful buffs. Okay, let's take a quick look at this node here, Breath of Fire. There's also an equal node for each of the other elements here on this wheel, and each of the small nodes also grants 6% pen for their respective element. In general, penetration is much more accessible across the entire passive tree and is found in larger quantities, but there's a big reason for that. Because in PoE2, penetration will no longer go into the negatives. This means that penetration has no effect against monsters that have no resistance to the type of damage you're dealing. Instead, it will be a tool to deal with monsters that do have resistance, such as bosses, but no longer a mechanic that is used as an excessive damage multiplier. Let's go back to Energy Shield for a moment and take a look at some of the largest increases to maximum ES on the tree, starting with Heavy Buffer. 40% increased max ES and 10% reduced maximum life. It's interesting to see a lot of the stronger nodes having trade-offs like this, almost like a keystone. There's also Melding, which is the same but with reduced mana instead of reduced life. Then there's Enhanced Barrier, which doesn't provide nearly as much increased maximum energy shield, but does grant 1% to all maximum elemental resistances, so that's a solid notable. And check out this one, Patient Barrier. 60% increased maximum energy shield, that is wild. If you can overcome that downside, this one is going to be insane value. Necromantic Talisman is a keystone located near the outer edge, which makes bonuses from your equipped amulet be applied to your minions instead of you. This is going to be ridiculous if that also includes any anoint that's on there. But otherwise, we're not too sure yet what sorts of modifiers will exist on amulets, so we'll have to wait and see for that. Another keystone at the outer edge of the tree is Whispers of Doom, which grants an extra curse at the cost of double the delay for curses to activate. This one will be a great keystone if you apply curses in ways that bypass the activation time, such as Blasphemy. Climate Change is Heat Shiver on the PoE2 passive tree, that one's pretty cool. And Ice Walls is interesting. Ice crystals are a secondary mechanic similar to something like Jagged Ground or Aftershocks, where you can scale their effects to make those skills which interact with them more powerful. There's another notable next to this one which also reduces the life of ice crystals instead, if you want to go that route. Endless Blizzard is at the top of the tree, right at the outer edge, +1 to the level of all cold skills. That's going to be extremely valuable for a lot of Sorc builds. And there's also Psychic Fragmentation, which grants a 24% chance for spells to fire 2 additional projectiles. That's really good, especially for something like Fireball, where the damage may overlap on explosions. Okay, we've saved the best till last, of course, and it's a bunch of stat stacking stuff again. Pure Power is right at the top of the tree and grants 2% increased lightning damage per 10 intelligence. Now, the fact that this is lightning damage is crazy considering we know that intelligence is going to grant a lot more mana in PoE2. It grants 2 mana per int, and yesterday we saw the Archmage persistent buff shown off in the PoE2 teaser, which combines incredibly well with this node. But if you want more reason to stack intelligence and mana, look no further than Arcane Intensity, which grants 3% increased spell damage per 100 maximum mana with no cap. That's going to be kind of ridiculous how much increased damage you can get by combining these two notables on an intelligence stacker. And what about modifiers to scale maximum mana? Well, aside from the 3% max mana on the Eldritch Will node from earlier, I could only find 2 notables in the intelligence section of the tree. Mana Blessing near the Witch and Sorceress start, and Raw Mana closer to the outer edge of the tree. I know that there's also a few notables in the Int Strength portion of the tree, so while mana didn't quite get the life treatment, it did get extremely limited compared to PoE1. But there is one crazy keystone that we need to talk about at the end here, which doesn't really have anything to do with Int, but mana? Yes. Eldritch Battery is changed in PoE2, and it now converts all of your energy shield into mana. This one is crazy, but there's a caveat. We know that conversion will work differently in PoE2, at least on the damage side of things. We don't know if those mechanics will work the same for other conversion, but one would assume a uniform system across the game. And that would mean that energy shield converted to mana wouldn't remember its origin, and therefore it wouldn't be affected by modifiers to energy shield. In other words, you won't be able to scale the portion of energy shield converted into mana with modifiers to energy shield. Only mana modifiers would apply to it. And that's it. Some of the more interesting nodes on the intelligence aligned portion of the tree. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.